Long ago, in a village nestled between the great baobab trees and the golden plains, there lived a young woman named Zuwena. She was as beautiful as the morning sun, with skin as smooth as river stones and eyes that sparkled like the stars. But beauty was no shield against hardship. Zuwena was born into sorrow, for her mother passed away while bringing her into the world, leaving her with only a name and no arms to cradle her. Her father had died before she was born, and so the burden of raising her fell upon her uncle, a man who never truly cared for her. He was a fisherman, rough in manner and sharp in tongue, providing food and shelter out of duty rather than love. He spoke little to her, except to give orders. Fetch water, Zuwena. Cook the rice, Zuwena. Mend my nets, Zuwena. She grew up longing for kindness, for a family that would cherish her. But when she turned 10, her uncle passed away suddenly, taken by a fever that swept through the village. The elders spoke in hushed tones, wondering what would become of her. A girl so young with no family, she's like a leaf blown in the wind, they murmured. Yet none took her in. They gave her scraps of food when they could, but she spent most nights alone in her uncle's hut, surviving on what little she could find. Years passed, and she blossomed into a striking young woman. The village men noticed her beauty, but they hesitated. In their traditions, a bride required a dowry, a gift from the groom's family to the bride's relatives to honor the marriage. But Zuwena had no family to receive such a payment, making her an unusual case. Some men considered offering for her, but an elder named Baba Kamisi, a man who commanded great respect, discouraged them. Without a dowry to exchange, a marriage would be unbalanced, he warned. Who would protect her if trouble comes? Who will ensure she is treated with respect? A woman without a family's backing is a woman left vulnerable. And so, despite her beauty, Zuwena remained alone, unwanted, not because she lacked appeal, but because she lacked the protection and status that a family name and dowry would bring. Unknown to Zuwena, her uncle had once approached Mzi Bakari years before, not out of concern for her future, but out of desperation. He had owed Mzi Bakari a debt, one that weighed heavily on him, and in exchange for leniency, he proposed an arrangement. Zuwena, when she came of age, could become Mzi Bakari's wife. At the time, Mzi Bakari had dismissed the idea. She was just a child, unremarkable in his eyes, and he had no need for another wife. The debt was paid through other means, and the matter was forgotten. But years later, when whispers of Zuwena's beauty reached him, he reconsidered. A wife with no family meant no need to pay a dowry. There would be no negotiations, no obligations. She would enter his household with no ties, no debts, and given her lack of status, she would have no power to refuse him. She has no family to bargain for her, he told the elders. No wealth to bring shame upon mine. She will be well taken care of. The elders, seeing no reason to object, upheld the agreement made long ago. To them, it was a fair arrangement, one that turned a girl without a future into a woman with status and security. And so, Zuwena became Mzi Bakari's fourth wife, unaware that her fate had been sealed long before she had a say in it. He was old enough to be a grandfather, but with no other options and hunger gnawing at her, she had little choice. Mzi Bakari promised to provide for her, and she clung to that promise, even as she stepped into a life she had never wished for. At first, her life seemed like a dream. She was bathed in perfumes from the coast, draped in fine silks, and adorned with jewelry that caught the sunlight. She ate the best foods, sat upon cushions softer than the clouds, and walked in the shade of a great house with servants to attend to her. For the first time in her life, she had a home. Mzi Bakari was kind to her in those first months, offering her gentle words and gifts. You are my joy, my light, my companion, and my lover, he would say, but it did not take long for the dream to unravel. Mzi Bakari was not the strong man he had seemed. He was ill, plagued by a sickness he had hidden from her. The whispers of the servants told the truth she had not been given before marriage. He has been unwell for many years, they said. His first wife bore him 6 sons and 3 daughters, his second wife 3 daughters, and his third wife, before her passing, gave him 3 sons. You are the 4th wife, and now only the second one, still alive, but sick and frail. At first, Zuwena believed the servants would care for him. The house was full of them, men and women trained to serve. But Mzee Bakari wanted no hands upon him but us. Stay with me, Zuwena, he would whisper. Your touch is the only one that eases my pain. She spent her days and nights at his side, feeding him, washing him, tending to his every need. His eyes followed her everywhere, his hands clutching hers. Whenever she tried to leave his room for even a moment, he grew weaker with each passing season, but his grip on her remained strong. Though she was young and full of life, he did not wish for her to leave his sight. His eldest son, Baraka, was the same age her uncle would have been if he were still alive. A man of ambition, power, and influence. He had 2 wives of his own and commanded respect within the household. In the early days of Zuwena's marriage, he rarely spoke to her, yet she often caught him watching her, his gaze lingering, studying her as if she were a prized addition to his father's collection. When Mzee Bakari's health worsened, Baraka's 2 wives, Aminata and Sefuya, began to control every step Zuwena took. You are not to leave his side, Aminata would say, her tone smooth like honey laced with poison. You must remember your place, Sefuya would add, her eyes sharp as a knife. Zuwena was only permitted to leave the house if one of them accompanied her, as if she were a restless bird they feared would fly away. You belong to him, they reminded her. His wealth has made you something more than you were. But Zuwena felt less than she had ever been. She had no child of her own, no freedom, only endless days of duty and nights of loneliness. The servants whispered about her sorrow, but did nothing to help her. They too were bound by the will of Mzee Bakari's family. For 5 long years, Zuwena cared for Mzee Bakari until one evening he took his final breath. She stood over his lifeless body, waiting for grief to wash over her. But instead, a strange lightness filled her chest. A quiet sense of relief crept in, followed swiftly by guilt for feeling it. Now I am free, she thought. Now I can live my life. But she had not accounted for Baraka, the eldest son. Baraka had inherited his father's land, his wealth, and his household. He was a man feared for his sternness, a man whose voice carried weight like a drum in the marketplace. Even his own children feared him, speaking only when spoken to. His 2 wives, Aminata and Sefuya, were expected to be obedient, yet, behind closed doors, they murmured their frustrations. He was not a man to be challenged. At first, Baraka ignored Zuwena, treating her as just another piece of his father's estate. But after the mourning period, he made an offer that sent a chill down her spine. You are still young, Zuwena, he said, his gaze heavy upon her. If you wish for protection, for security, you may join my household fully. In time, you may become my 3rd wife. Her stomach twisted. She had traded one master for another, and now she was expected to submit once again. Aminata and Sefuya, Baraka's wives, overheard whispers of this arrangement before Zuwena did. And the moment they realized their husband was considering taking Zuwena as his 3rd wife, a deep fear settled in their bones. They knew and had heard the talk of Zuwena's beauty, the way servants and traders spoke of her delicate features and soft voice. Even as Mzee Bakari's wife, her presence had been overshadowed by his illness. But now she was still young, unclaimed, and dangerously captivating. What do you think will happen if she becomes the 3rd wife? Sefuya murmured one evening. She will be put above us, Aminata whispered back. She will be the fresh young bride. He will favor her. The fear turned to bitterness, and bitterness turned to action. They began to undermine her confidence, finding ways to chip away at her self-worth. "You were nothing before Mizi Bakari took you in," Aminata would remind her. "You think beauty means anything? A woman without sons is of no value," Sifuya would sneer. "You are lucky he is even considering you," they would whisper. They controlled what she wore and monitored her every move. Her access to certain parts of the household was restricted, ensuring she was never alone with Baraka, denying him the chance to favor her. And worst of all, Baraka did nothing to stop them. Whether he noticed their cruelty or not, it was clear he intended to keep Zuwena in sight. She was not free to visit the village alone. She was not free to make decisions for herself. She was a possession, watched carefully by a master who had not yet decided what to do with her. Zuwena felt the walls closing in. She had been the fourth wife of an old man, but now she was a prize, one she did not want to be won. One evening, as the fireflies danced outside her window, Zuwena sat alone. The walls that had once belonged to her husband now belonged to another, and she knew that if she did not leave now, she never would. The next morning, an old woman arrived at the outer courtyard. A griot, a wandering storyteller who traveled from village to village. That night, the griot shared a tale of a butterfly, trapped in the darkness of its cocoon, believing it was the only world that existed. The cocoon was safe, familiar, and all it had ever known. But as time passed, the walls that once protected it began to feel like a prison. The butterfly longed for something more, though it did not yet understand what lay beyond. Then one day, a voice deep within urged it to push, to fight against the shell that confined it. With great effort, it stretched its fragile wings and broke free. At first, the world felt overwhelming, the light too bright, the air too vast. But as the butterfly lifted itself into the sky, it realized that it had been meant to fly all along. What once seemed like the end was, in fact, a new beginning. As the griot finished, she looked at Zuwena and said, "The caterpillar does not know it will become a butterfly, but it transforms all the same." Zuwena listened, her heart pounding. The message lingered in her mind, replaying over and over. That night, as the house lay silent and everyone slept, she fled. Some say she traveled to a distant village and built a new life. Others say she became a griot herself, telling the story of the caged butterfly to young women who needed to hear it. But one thing was certain: when Baraka and his wives woke the next morning, Zuwena was gone, and only the whisper of the wind remained. Zuwena's journey was not one of chains and captivity, but of feeling trapped in a life with limited choices. She had been given a place of comfort and wealth, yet it came at the cost of her freedom. She was surrounded by luxury, yet she felt powerless. Her future had been decided for her, and though she was cared for, she longed for something more, a life of her own making. Like the butterfly in the griot's tale, we are not meant to remain in places that no longer allow us to grow. The cocoon that once provided shelter can become a barrier to the life we are meant to live. The lesson for us all: growth requires courage. The butterfly does not know what awaits outside the cocoon, yet it pushes forward. Stepping into the unknown is often the first step towards something greater. Comfort is not the same as freedom. Zuwena had a life many would envy, yet she felt unfulfilled. True happiness comes from having the power to choose our own path. We must listen to the whispers of change. Just as the griot's story awakened something in Zuwena, there are moments in life that call us to something more. The question is, will we listen? African proverb: when the roots grow deep, there is no reason to fear the wind. Zuwena's story reminds us that change is not something to fear, but something to embrace. The world is wide, and our wings were meant to fly. We all have wings, even if we don't realize it yet. And when the time comes, we must be brave enough to fly.